What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, blues people? How y'all doing? Yeah, I'm just looking around. I got my computer here. I got some notes, not too many. This is kind of off the top. Y'all let me know if y'all hear me well. Remember, don't hesitate. You could jump in the chat because we're gonna have a little talk before it's what time is it? All right, because I got work to do and kids got music to do. And everybody here got work to do. Hopefully, everybody here got music to do. But we got to talk about music, the culture, and the history and the tradition. There's so much going on. You know what I'm saying? What's happening? What's happening with you? I am well, and I hope you're well as well. Um, there's so much going on, but there's just a couple of things I want to talk about. I don't even think if I gave this a title, right? Maybe later on, I'll give it a title. I'll just shout out to my Facebook people. I'll shout out to my YouTube folk and LinkedIn folk and everybody else that is on the live broadcast. And those of you who'll be hearing the, I guess, podcast version, I'm just looking over to check the audio. Uh, I want to shout y'all out too in iTunes world and iHeart radio world, Anchor world, and all the places that we stream. But I want to talk about something that's like really bugging me out right now. Ah, I think this is what the title is. Our traditional music started here. Where is here? And why are we having this discussion? Well, and I try to stay out of this discussion, right? But everywhere I look, whether it's on social media platforms, whether excuse me is people live broadcasting on YouTube or their own platforms, even some of my people who I revere and we follow each other and work together, I see that they're also responding, and even people I don't follow, right? But I check in with them because they have strong voices and some of the things that they say I agree with, not all. Everybody has been pulled in to chime into this conversation. I understand why, because there's just so many variables. It is quite convoluted, like all of history, if you will. But that's why it is important to look at it through a folkloristic lens, right? Because when you look at it through a folkloristic lens, when you look at it through an oral history lens, when you look at it through a field ethnographical lens, you can quantify and qualify. What does that mean? You can get a good uh, assessment of what it's really about. So, how will we look at it through a folkloristic lens? One. Two, what are we talking about? Three, why am I chiming in? So, we're talking about this conversation that, for whatever reason, all of a sudden it's become humongous. Hi, Miss Deidre, what's happening with you? You don't see anyone. You don't see me, lady? I don't know what to say about that. I'll have to fix that in a minute. But I'm happy you hear me. What we're talking about is the inception of hip hop. And the fact that people are saying hip hop, um, our Jamaican, West Indian brothers and sisters, and our Latino and Latina brothers and sisters created this. And what's considered Black American has nothing to do with this, right? So we heard uh, Mr. Busta Rhymes say a couple of things. There's a older gentleman that I follow. Pharaoh said that, I believe is called, and according to him, Busta Rhymes said that Black Americans have no or had no culture. There was nothing going on here. I don't know if he said that. I do know he did say that um, the culture of hip hop cultivated in the West Indies. I've heard him say that, and a couple of other people, and even people that don't have a platform, I heard say that. There's quite a few issues with some of these statements, right? So let's first start by talking about um Black America has no culture. And the biggest issue, and I've spoken about this on many occasions, one of the biggest issues is those that are considered our leaders perpetuated that narrative from the 60s and 70s when they were saying we were robbed of everything, we don't have anything, and that we were moving in assimilated time, right? That is a big proponent of people for people to be able to say black folk, American black folk have no tradition or no history or no culture. That perpetuates that narrative. But now we're going to break a few things down to prove that incorrect. Okay. Now, I really don't have much notes with me today. I'm just going off the top. I don't plan this to be a long broadcast. I do have some things here around me that I want to touch on, but, or at least not touch on, but bring to the table in defense of Black America having culture from inception of America, Turtle Island, if you will. Um, Well, yeah. So, and it's funny you say so. There's so much. So there's two ways we could look at this, right? Because sister says African diaspora. The diaspora is very real, right? But there's two ways we can look at it. We can look at it through the lens of African-centered diaspora, or we can look at it through the lens of uh, Amerindian, indigenous to the Americas diaspora. Either way, they're Black narratives. Either way, they both constitute, if you will, they both suggest, if you will, that this hemisphere was occupied by melanated people first. So, just with that, regardless if we're looking at it through the lens of Africana or if we're looking at it through the lens of Indian, of this hemisphere, Americas, South Americas, Mexico, all of this was occupied by melanated people first. That is really the bottom line, whichever side of the fence or whatever ideology you subscribe to, that is a fact. So there's the book, They Came Before Columbus. You have the Moors who clearly state that they were here, they were seamen and they came here before the Europeans, before the Persians and things of this nature, which is the Ottoman Empire, if you will. And they all suggest that they've come here and they've interacted with melanated people, dark brown people. Then you have the lighter skinned, the non people of color, um, colonizers, if you will, but some of them weren't colonizers yet. Okay, that came over and in their journals, in their documents, they describe mahogany people that they've encountered on the Americas when they first came. And this is pre 1492. This is 1300s, 1200s. This is also 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. And they describe mahogany people. Mahogany would be my complexion, right? And some a little lighter, some a little darker. And one of the one of the telling things, I gotta find his name, but if you go to the African American Folklorist.com, and matter of fact, I'll put the link in a second. There's a article I wrote. I'll find it and put the link here. Um, I think I was why aren't Black Indians celebrated with Black History Month? I believe was the actual article I wrote. But in that article, I spoke about someone of the colonies in Virginia that was going to the Indian territory of Virginia, describing them as mahogany colored creatures. The men and women were quite exotic. And what his statement was, we can bleed the color out of these women in 3 generations. They all are mahogany exotic beasts or creatures, as he put it. So why is this important? Why am I talking about this? What does this have to do with the conversation of hip hop, the conversation of it of Black America not having a culture? Because it not to mention our leaders, if you will, Farrakhan being one of them, Malcolm X being another one. And don't get me wrong, I've learned a lot from these gentlemen, but they've clearly said, and in one shape or another, they were making a point of our conditions and our conditioning, right? So don't get what I'm about to say misconstrued, and understand where I'm coming from, because I did receive what they were saying. But to say that somebody's texting me while I'm live, oh my man, I got to get back to him. Um, to say that Black America has no culture, that is false, right? To say American Blacks have no culture, that is false on so many levels. On so many levels, right? Because the culture of the Americas come from the melanated people. There's an anthropologist, a Mexican anthropologist. His name escapes me. He said, based on his study and excavation of the turn of the century, the Americas was a Negro land. Let's talk about that word, Negro. Negro is specific to the Black American, right? Cultural negotiation. I like that term, sis. I like that term. I like that term a lot. It is psychological warfare. So, you know what? Let me jump into this point. Thank you for saying that. So, for those of you who are unaware, there's someone named Richard Wallachek. He's dead now. Okay, he was a ethnomusicologist of the before the turn of the century, a German Western music ethnomusicologist, excuse me, or if you will, a music historian. In some cases, ethnomusicologists transcribe the music, break it down to its bare minimum atoms and neutrons and things of this nature. And he wrote a book called what is this? I just want to make sure. Okay, Primitive Music in 1893. Very telling. Why is this very telling? What was going on in 1893? And then he wrote a book called Primitive Music. So first, let me just set the context up of why I bring this to the table. So this guy, Richard Wallachek, I believe his name is, Wallachek. Wallachek. I'm gonna put his name here. I'll type it in for you guys if you want to look him up. Uh, so Richard Wallachek, like I said, was an ethnomusicologist, if you will, a music historian from Germany, right? I'm just looking to make sure I spell his name right, so you guys can look him up. While Wallachek, yeah, okay, and he wrote a book called Primitive Music, right? And most of you who have been following me, listening to me for some time, you already know my feeling when it comes to uh where we at. Posts, yep, read Facebook groups, we're good to go. We're good to go. All right. You guys know how I feel when it comes to the use of the word primitive, obscure. So he writes this book called Primitive Music in 1893. Why is that year important? Because now we're talking about after the quote unquote emancipation, after quote unquote Juneteenth, after the Tennessee Kentucky border Juneteenth, the Texas Juneteenth, right? And just to be clear, in the Tennessee Kentucky region, it was actually August 8th. And then you have in the 1880s through the turn of the century Reconstruction, and you have the birth of a different kind of blues music. Now, blues music was not birthed then because even on in enslaved days, you had slave seculars along with field hollers, along with spirituals and the different other types of black traditional musics that were birthed on this land. And you can even listen to people like Memphis Minnie in Chickasaw blues, Chickasaw train blues, I believe, which the lyrics are credited to Son House for writing, or you could listen to Charlie Patton talking about going to the reservation in Down Dirt Road Blues, or I mean, I can go through many. Son House in My Black Woman talks about a red black woman. What's a red black woman? What do you think he's talking about? An Indian woman, a black woman from the Americas. Black me when black became our classification description, if you will, by color. But prior to that, it was by tribe. So I say all of this because what happens is in this time, in 1880s, is when the if you will, structure, genre of music shifts. Blues takes on another form. Black folk that have been being pushed off Indian territory, because now, if you remember, Florida, Mississippi, and that whole region that we call the Delta, from Florida all the way to Texas and Alabama, and all this is all Indian territory until about 1799. And then you start seeing Mississippi come about. We've had Louisiana. We start seeing these different things sprout up, and we start seeing slave states. We start seeing plantations, right? Then we start seeing sharecropping more or less after this domestic slave situation, right? Now I'm going through this rather quickly, but what I'm getting to is the music and the conveying of the music shifts a little bit, particularly in this 1860 to 1890 area, right? More solo singing, less unison, more, the guitar, the banjo, the piano, different instruments play different parts in class of society, right? So we see these things, and while this is happening, you have string music, string bands, old time is what they call it. Another style of music which became known as hillbilly music, and hillbilly is a derogatory state word. You have that which was again spearheaded by what's considered black folk, black family, bluegrass, which was again spearheaded by a black man who taught it to who becomes known as the king or father of bluegrass in this region, Kentucky, right? So all of these things are happening as the blues is being established. The blues, you can even say, single-handedly put an end to minstrelsy, right? The, as the blues transformed from blue meaning risque that was going on in the red light districts of New Orleans and these places, and spreads out, and it turns to the blues as we know it today, as a man woman group talking about relationship, different day-to-day things, secular things, and in some case secular things within the spirit, right? Fun, party, what have you. It single-handedly destroys minstrelsy and vaudeville, right? To the point, and non-ethnic people were having hard times getting into the music. And when I say into the music, they liked the music, but unlike jazz, it wasn't readily available to be inclusive, if you will. right? So now this is really happening, right? This is and Sister Deidre, a lot of those slave ships never left the Americas. They went from New Orleans to South Carolina, from South Carolina back to New Orleans, if you will. They went to the West Indies and came back here before they went over there, and they were bringing people from here over there in a lot of cases, right? So we're looking at a situation. Oh, and don't let me forget, because there was a time when in New Orleans, when the Creole and the dark skin, the uptown and the downtown Negroes played together. Jim Crow did that, put an end to that, right? So when all this is happening, and then we start to get these folklorists and anthropologists. Now we're not talking about the Charlotte Fortin Gremkes, right? Because at the same time this man writes this book, Richard Wallace, Charlotte Fortin Gremke is in the gullahs of St. Helena Island, documenting Black spirituals of newly freed slaves, right? There's others, not Garrison, I can't think of the gentleman's name, who was a colonel or general or something to this effect of a Black regiment, and he documented Black Negro spirituals as well. None of these people were Caribbean. None of these people were from Africa. These were Black Americans. So what does this have to do with anything? These are the predecessors of hip hop. How? Let's talk about the Black church, okay? And now we're not talking about it in regards to the operations and belief system of the Baptist and the Pentecostal and the Methodist and the AME, which the AME is, if you will, connected to Africa more than the others, right? So the Pentecost, the Methodist, the Baptist is more connected to Southern culture, right? And I didn't connected to a race, because you have Southern white Baptist, Southern Black Baptist, Southern white Pentecostal, Southern Black Pentecostal, so on and so forth. And if you really want to get down, they get down in similar ways, right? So that's why I didn't put a racial identification or classification to that, right? But to go to the Southern Black church specifically, right? I'm talking about Southern Black church specifically right now. There's a thread. There's a thread that comes from hundreds of thousands of years on the Americas, in the backwoods, in the fields, I think they were called the Bush, but not Bush parties. So and the frolicking, all these things, there is a particular style of pastoring, right? There is a particular, are y'all still with me? Do I need to check anything? Are y'all still with me? Can y'all hear me? There's a particular style of pastoring that comes out the Black church that is prevalent in hip hop. Let me say this again. There is a particular style of pastoring prevalent in the Black church that is specific to hip hop. Okay? What does that even mean? Hooping, hollering ministers, right? Hooping, hollering ministers. You find that in rap. Go to a traditional Black church. Listen to a hooting, hollering minister. And as he's going in, you can hear the essence of MCing. That didn't come from nowhere but here. And that wasn't created yesterday. That wasn't created in 1974. That wasn't created in 1986. Like, you can go through my playlists on on Spotify. Go through my playlist on Spotify, right? And you'll hear old ministers going in. Because as a folklorist, I like to not just document but present traditional expression, so you can see, get a feel of what's going on, right? Okay, I'm sorry. I was checking out. I did an impromptu live. I'm just checking out a couple of texts that came through, right? So there's a style of MCing that comes from the pastor. And the pastor didn't start doing that when he heard rappers. They took that out the church. The same way the blues and the church and the blues and the choir and the blues and the gospel and the blues and the black spiritual go together. The creation of American music comes from the spirituals and the slave secular, the field hollers and the prison work songs. Ragtime comes from this. Rock and roll comes from this. Rock and roll was not started in Europe. We all know this. It was definitely not started in Britain. We all know this. But what we do know, the Moors was in Britain because they were all through that area. But more importantly, bringing it back to the music, the British invasion was the repackaging of American black music and selling it to an audience that was not receiving it from American blacks. Now, I tell you all this not to be divisive. No, because that is never my intent. That is never my purpose. I tell you all this not to say, well, you can't enjoy or take part in the culture. Never my purpose. Not what I'm saying. But to say that Black Americans have nothing to do or did not have a significant role in the creation of hip hop is just ignorant. I don't even know what else to say. And I'm ashamed to hear that coming from people who, and this goes back to saying culture vultures are not just people that are not of color. You can have black culture vultures, right? You can have people of POC, people of color, BIPOC, right? Have you, whatever the term is now, that's inclusive to all of us, black and brown, English speaking, Spanish speaking, Creole, whatever it is. There are culture vultures in our tribes as well. And that is a culture vulture thing to say to remove the root of majority of these things, which is the Black American. Not because we're special. It's similar to the story in the Old Testament. It wasn't that the Israelites were special, because if you really read, they annoyed the hell out of the Most High. They even annoyed Yahushua, right? It wasn't that they were better than anyone, but do you understand? So it's not so. I'm not saying we are better than anyone as the American, considered Black American, right? But what I am saying is, as it comes to traditional expressions, majority of them has been cultivated by our joy and pain. And at the end of the cultivation, we seem to be the first to be removed, whether it's from a person non of color or a person of color. It doesn't matter. When the conversation of reparations was brought to the table, everybody wanted to identify with the American Black struggle. But prior to that, our Caribbean brothers and sisters and our other POC brothers and sisters, if you will, really has some choice words for Black Americans. Actually, most people took the ideology of the colonizer when it came to how they viewed the American black uh, citizens, if you will. So it's like I don't really see how could I put this? I'm not surprised, right, that we're being etched out of the creation of hip hop, or or it's even being said that there was no culture of Black America, but it came from what could be considered exotic cultures of melanated people because y'all were just slaves. This is what you might as well be saying. Now, I just want to say, you know, to my Latino brothers and sisters, and I haven't heard many of my Latino brothers and sisters speak about this, but I will say, y'all Taino, y'all Indian like we Indian. So I just don't understand. But you, I'm just so without going into finger pointing, let me just lay it out. And one of the reasons why, again, I brought up Richard Wallachek because he said in the book Primitive Music, Negro music, and again, Negro synonymous to American Black. Negro is synonymous to American Black. Y'all could talk all this other stuff you want. It is synonymous to those here, started here, DNA here, right? He said Negro music was an imitation knockoff of Western music, of European music. At best, that our Black spirituals were bad imitations of Western hymns. Now, you understand why the origins of Black gospel hymns was called Black spirituals, because it was on the Black keys. But the Black keys was how the music resonated to the melanated people, right? Now, why is that important? What's happening, Brother Gerald? You know we got to get back at it, right? Why is that important? Why is it important that he said that our music was a bad knockoff of Western music, of Western hymns, of classical music, and that he said it in 1893 because we're looking at a change of the guard because a lot of that classical music came from melanated people from that region. But the melanated people that are indigenous to the Americas who are playing the blues and singing Black spirituals, creating ragtime and all these other things, field hollers, slave seculars, and all these things that were cultivated here on the Americas, nowhere else, was rising. What do I mean rising? No longer was it just specific and isolated to a particular folk group, but it was expanding, or as they say in business, scaling up, right? Because now blacks, if you will, that's what you want to call them, because there was free blacks at the time. And I don't even want to get into it because we always talk about these slave narratives, which is very important, but there were more free blacks than those enslaved. And those enslaved, more of them were from here and less of them was from there. But that's not the point. After emancipation, during Reconstruction, as there was this melting pot and people are really traveling freely, the Black American music scales up. Scales up meaning what? They're teaching like I can't think of this. It wasn't Ernest Hogan. I can't think of his name. Who taught the father of bluegrass? We can go down the list of the many things that were happening. We also can go talk about how the piano and the banjo were high class, high society instruments right? We can also talk about how we were coming towards the end. Again, I said this earlier, the end of minstrelsy because of the blues. Things was changing. Things were changing. And then you have European, German, and American white folklorists and anthropologists referring to expressions cultivated by black folk on the Americas as primitive. This isn't, you understand? So now you shoot to now, and we're having this conversation amongst ourselves, and in this conversation we're leaving out those who, come on. If that's not, my brother always says the oppressed take on the characteristics of the oppressor. We celebrate everything except what is ours. We look to another continent, we look to another this, we look to another that. We are standing on our home. This is our land. The blues is the great, great, great grandparents, if you will, of hip hop. And both were cultivated on this land out of lack of resources for the indigenous people of this land. You understand what I'm saying? I'm sorry. I just get really excited at this. Matter of fact, if you even want to take it further, hey, Sister Deidre, I got your email. If you want to take it further, 1954-55, the Rhythm and Blues Review, the first time or one of the first times the moonwalk is done on nationally syndicated television. And the moonwalk becomes the staple of breakdancing at one point. So what really kills me is how can you say this is not coming from Black Americans when this was being done during the, I guess, height of exploitation of Black American arts. And then when you go around the planet, if you will, most of the people around the planet, colored or non-colored, are utilizing, implementing, or being inspired by the movement, art, marginalization, and revolutionary tactics of the Black American. Yet those that look like us are saying we have nothing to do with something we created. I would much rather say we've all cultivated this in some way. Somebody, I just says Facebook user. I'm not sure who it is, but how you doing? You're very welcome, Sister Deidre. So it's like I'd much rather say, you know what? Though you're the root, we've all played a part, and that is true, right? Because we everybody has played a part in the cultivation of culture, particularly if you're kind of, if you will, uh, pushed together in a region. It spills over. Um, I mention this often. James Brown in his book mentions that in I believe in Augusta they was poor, but they were living amongst poor whites, and poor whites were living amongst poor blacks, and they were so poor, skin color didn't matter. They came together and ate together and did different things like this. Now, in some places, this is evident. There's a book called Freedom at the Border, right? And it's an oral history of Black Kentucky. I was amazed at some of the things I've read, and some of these people in that gave their oral history testimonies shared they didn't have the same problem as either bigger cities or specific towns, where their situation was, people didn't like each other. People had regular human interactive problems, but it wasn't predicated on race because everybody knew what what it was. We're all poor. We all trying to make it. So some of these, you know, so a lot of stuff is convoluted. So I would rather hear it be shared as if we contributed to your culture. We contributed to your traditional art. We contributed to your traditional expression. Because if you go and listen to Chuck Berry, he's rapping. These are Southern folk, country black folk that were Indian. And then if you really, really, really want to study and check out the vernacular of Southern blacks and West Indian blacks, our dialogues, country black folk, Southern black folk, and Caribbean black folk, our dialogue and our vernacular and how we say words are way more similar than any other melanated person on any other hemisphere. I go on down the road. That's how they talk in my old neighborhood in Crown Heights, in Flatbush. I go on down the road. But then when you go down south, they say the same thing in the same way. They're not coming from the West Indies. That's Southern dialect. But the one thing, they're all Indian, West Indian, and American Indian. If we want to talk about that. But more to what I'm discussing here is the traditional expression created, amplified, cultivated on Turtle Island, on the Americas, on what becomes the US of A, all during the multiple reclassifications of a marginalized group of people. And in this marginalization, we keep getting moved more and more and more and more out of our creative birthrights for the many things that comes from our love and pain. Blues being one of them, but I would not ever believe hip hop would be one of the things that would be being taken away from us and being said by our own, or what I would think would be our own. You know what I mean? It is what is this? Black American tradition. Okay, I'm trying to see what I named this. I don't remember what I named this. For those watching, for those that's going to listen later on, audio wise, I guess it doesn't even matter, right? But our traditional music started here, and for years, including 1893 from Richard Wallachek, folks have been trying to discredit us and what we do and how we stand. Right? Thank you, Charlotte Fortin Gremke. Charlotte Fortin Gremke's father, this dude was serious. Free black man, right? He actually funded the Liberator ran by William Garrison. His family and those who married into his family was instrumental in abolition, instrumental in the Underground Railroad. They put William Still on, okay? James Fortin is his name. And he became wealthy, right? He bought his way out of slavery, the whole spiel. But he became a power in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. He actually went to the what are these people called? I forget, but he went to the black, colored, and mulatto schools of Pennsylvania before or after the Revolutionary War, when it became illegal to educate these folk. And he did a great job. But the point I'm making is, I believe he became part of an AME church out there, and they make up this thing where we're going to send Black Americans back to Africa. Where Liberia, I think it is. We're going to send them to Africa. We're going to send them, and he really didn't want to do that, but he thought he was doing the right thing. So he goes and he's talking to the people that put him in this position, and the folk on the ground that were not rich, that he was helping, that were people of every day of the community, Was like, "What are you doing? What you sending us where? We're from here." So he retracted it, okay? He funded a lot of movements for the freedom and liberation of American melanated people. Now, the reason why I speak about him because I was talking about his daughter Charlotte Fortin Grumke. Charlotte is educated in the best schools. She had to be educated outside of Philadelphia because by the time she comes along, they were not allowing black children in the best schools there. So she was educated in Boston and in Massachusetts and places like this. She comes back and she goes down to educate I said this earlier in a broadcast. She goes down to St. Helena Islands in the Carolinas to educate the newly freed slaves. But and you can see my writing on her in the new upcoming African American Folklorist magazine. I just did a small thing. I didn't go too deep into it, but she's so her and her family are people that I just have a lot of interest in. She it didn't work out too well. And what do I mean by it didn't work out too well? She was a brilliant, brilliant scholar, right? But there's this thing with in the black community, if you will, in the melanated community, there's a class thing where you have elite scholarly blacks, and then you have what you can call the everyday blacks, if you will, that's not their thing. Um, the elite education, right? And you have these blacks that have missionary mindsets. I'm going to go down here and we're going to help better our people. And down there, they may not think they need to be better. They're fine in their tradition. But what happens is she hears a song style. She sees an attire, a dress that the women clothing the women wear, head wraps and things the women wear. This is in the 1800s, 1825 maybe, 1835, something like this. When they're going to church, and a lot of this clothing, these attires, and the way they sing and the way they worship is prevalent right now in worship attire, culture, tradition, but also in the music that y'all are saying come from somewhere else yet again. I just don't understand why anything that is done, cultivated here by those who's been here the longest is always given credit somewhere else. That's what the issue is. It's not the issue that we share it, that we exchange it, right? Because cultures are to be exchanged. It's not the fact that none of this traditions are to be exchanged. The fact that the problem, at least for me, is that it's constantly being given away. Either the rights is given away, or the birth right is given away, or the actual creativity of it, meaning those who experienced whatever they experienced that that inspired them to express in a particular way. So it's being given away. Matter of fact, it got to the point the way black Americans phrased their vocalizing and singing started getting ripped off, not just by Europeans, not just by British, not just by non-black people, but by our brothers and sisters in the Carib and our brothers and sisters in the Red Sea area, the Mediterranean, our brothers and sisters in Africa. Oh, I know nobody wants to hear that. But if we were getting everything from Africa, our brothers and sisters in Africa would have spearheaded hip hop. That was birthed in New York City, not by Caribbean, not by African, but by the people in those communities. And then 20, 30 years later, we see our brothers and sisters in Africa dressing like people I grew up with in Brooklyn. Again, we share cultures, right? Again, there's also the exploitation of cultures, but we share cultures. So what I'm saying is not based on anger. What I'm saying is not based on, well, you can't take part in it. No, I will never say that. It doesn't matter what your color, religion, whatever it is. You can take part, you can contribute, because we're trying to make a situation. I'm personally trying to make a situation where we can coexist in things together. That's why I think the documentation of people's culture are important, because when you share it, you get an understanding. You understand, I understand. We may not eat at each other's dinner table, but we have an understanding we can coexist. So I'm not saying, or I'm not being divisive of saying that you can't partake or things of this nature. But what I'm saying is, you see the movements of these traditional expressions and everything that come with it and where it comes from and where it lands, but you still end up saying Black American has nothing to do with it. I just don't know. It's just weird. It's just weird to me. It's weird to me. It's very weird to me. Or there's a way to find a way to make something or someone else more prevalent in the institutionalizing of our traditions. I don't get it. I don't get it. But what I do get, or what I will do, is continue, do my best to document all sides so we can get an understanding, right? And more importantly, put it in the proper context. And just to be clear, there's a white musical expert. His name was Henry Krebil, or Krebel. I've always called him Henry Krebel, but it's Henry Krebil. And he did an analysis. I can't think of the name of his I can't think of the name of his work right now, but he himself corrected um Richard Wallace check in that primitive music statement. So Henry Krebil, a white musicologist, was like, "No, you're wrong, dude. The most American and the most black thing there is black folk music, which stems from the black experience on the Americas. Come on. Do you know what folk music is? Music of the folk, right?" All right. Well, look, listen, we had a great time. I had a great time. This was impromptu. I'm not going to tell y'all when I'm doing this again because I just don't know. There's a lot going on. And I'm not complaining. I'm happy, but I will be back up. This, for those of you who missed it, be sure to catch it where our podcasts live and distribute. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Remember. Oh, one more thing. Matter of fact, we'll talk about that another time. Just remember, don't just look at the newspapers and don't just look at the history books. Try to find the people, because that's where you're going to get the answers from. Oral history, folkloristic documentation. That's where you're going to get the answers from. That's where you're going to get the answers from. Thank y'all for rocking with me. I will get with y'all later.